and welcome to this episode of Skiff Meetings podcast. My name is Andrea Doyle, and I am the executive editor at Skiff Meetings. In this episode titled Uncovering the Untold Story, I have the pleasure of speaking with Kitty Ratcliffe, the president of Explore St. Louis. One of the keys to Kitty's success, doing just that, uncovering the untold story. She does it by leaving her office and interacting with the 115 full-timers who report to her, as well as the hundreds of part-timers. That is how she gets the untold stories that might not be so positive, but they are the stories she feels she needs to hear. We cover things like how receiving MPI's Industry Leader Award in June brought her 40-year involvement with organization Full Circle. We chatted about what it has been like to be a vegetarian for the past 40 years, and how the issue of travel boycotts is not new, and what it was like when the Equal Rights Amendment was being fought to guarantee the protection against sexual discrimination for women. She talked about how women have broken the glass ceiling, but there's still progress that needs to be made, and how hard work got her to where she is today. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation, and I invite you to check out other episodes from today's most influential event professionals. You can find all the episodes on our website or subscribe through your favorite podcast service.
I'm Kitty Ratcliffe, president of Explore St. Louis.
And congratulations on the award you received during MPI WEC.
Thank you. It was a big honor for me. Actually overwhelming to receive it. So,
and it's such a beautiful evening.
It was extraordinary. MPI just did an amazing job with that event. Working with the Hilton Tulum in Mexico and Riviera Maya, and you walked into the ballroom and you thought you were in the jungle. It was just beautifully decorated. So it just set the stage for a really wonderful evening.
Right. And you received MPI's 2023 Industry Leader Award.
That's correct. Yeah.
Wow. And what does that recognition mean to you?
Well, it was astonishing to me, actually. I've been involved with MPI since I got in the business, and that's 40 years ago. I joined. Actually, it was really interesting because I joined MPI 40 years ago because MPI's annual conference was being held in St. Louis.
Oh, wow.
And I could attend, and they gave me the Industry Leader Award exactly 40 years later. So from being nothing and a nobody at the at the start of the business, and kind of learning my way through to being recognized for having made some contribution at some level for MPI all that time later was really very wonderful.
Talk about full circle.
It really was full circle.
And when you went to your first MPI in St. Louis, what were you doing at that time 40 years ago?
I had just started in the industry about 7 or 8 months earlier. I was hired to be the first director for a startup, very small convention and tourism bureau in Carbondale, Illinois, which is a university town about 100 miles southeast of St. Louis in southern Illinois. And so when I went in for the interview, nobody who had any experience doing that kind of job was going to move to Carbondale to do it. So they had a bunch of inexperienced candidates that they were interviewing. And so I did my research in the library. And one of the things that I said when I went into the interview, and they said to me, well, what would you do if you got the job? And I said, well, I would join this organization and this organization and this, and I would do this and this. And one of those things was I would join Meeting Planners, because that's what it was called at the time, Meeting Planners International. And I would get people to bring their meetings and conferences to Carbondale, and they didn't laugh at me. So, and they hired me. So it was very interesting.
So that was your start.
Yeah. And so that I just got lucky that, in fact, the conference itself was being held in St. Louis that next year. If it were being held anywhere else, I probably would not have attended. but because it was 100 miles up the road, I could drive. I didn't have to buy an airplane ticket. And St. Louis is a very affordable destination, so I was able to afford the hotel room for a couple of nights in my very tiny budget, and walked into the opening night reception and didn't know a soul. And a guy who worked for Merritt's came up to me and saw my first timer badge and introduced himself and said I should join the chapter and get involved with the chapter. And so I did.
What a great story.
Yeah. That chapter was a great start for me because it really introduced me to the business that I was in, that I found myself in. I met a lot of people through the chapter level in the chapter who had been or were in the process of or would later become very involved internationally with MPI, either serving on committees or actually being what was then called president, now chairman of the board. And this chapter, very small chapter, has a great history of producing international leaders. And so I got really lucky. I got in the right chapter at the right time in my career to make a lot of connections and to learn my craft, and then also to have people who were involved in an international level that could help me and pushed me along to get involved at a greater level beyond the chapter.
And the story to me also demonstrates the importance of associations.
Absolutely. And the importance of that face-to-face interaction, which never would have occurred if it had just simply been online.
Right, right. And I mean, your MPI Industry Leader Award is just one of your many awards. I know last year you received a Lifetime Achievement Award from PCMA, and you've also served on PCMA's board and chaired their annual convention. Can you touch upon that?
Yeah, I was. I've actually been quite astonished at the number of awards I've gotten in these last couple of years, because I'm not quite sure I deserve any of them, but I'm taking them. No doubt about that. I actually joined PCMA about 5 or 6 months before I joined MPI. So all in that first year that I was in the business, I paid membership dues to 4 different organizations that I felt would be ones that would help me bring business to Carbondale at the time. And so PCMA was one, what is now DI. It was the International Association of Convention Bureaus at the time, and ASAE, as well as MPI. And so I went to my first PCMA conference, again, not knowing a soul, about 2 months after I got in the business. And again, on the opening reception, I happened to meet somebody who knew other people and introduced me around. And so both organizations have been very important to me my entire career. And they helped make my career. They helped make me who I am. They helped train me for the jobs that I had and to be better at those jobs. So it was incredibly important to get that Lifetime Achievement Award last year from PCMA. It was very, very much an honor.
That's great. And then you also received Destination International's Leadership in Environmentally Responsible Tourism Award. And in 2019, you were inducted into their Hall of Fame. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, the Environmentally Responsible Tourism Award came years and years ago, just from some interaction that I had with trying to train destinations on the importance of embracing and not fighting efforts to be more environmentally responsible in our activities and how we managed through meetings and events, and also the impact that tourism would have on our destinations. And I think I probably got that award from DI 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago, maybe even. because a lot of people weren't talking about it in those days, or if they were talking about it, it was something that they didn't really want to have to do. And then DI did induct me into their Hall of Fame in 2019, which actually was during the convention that we hosted here. We hosted DI's annual convention here in 2019. So it was great to be able to have that happen while I was in my own hometown with my own team in the audience.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And since we are talking about awards, there's also the Apex Award from Black Meetings and Tourism, which made me want to ask you, how important is diversity and inclusion when it comes to meetings and conferences? And like, what do you feel the industry gets right and not so right?
Well, it's very important. I mean, it's important socially. So if anything is important socially, it should be important to the meetings and events industry. And I would say that in many respects we're no different than any other industry, and the history, in that we were not, as an industry, we were not intentional about trying to be diverse. We were not intentional about trying to bring people into our organization who didn't just step up and volunteer on their own. And so we are in a recovery period because, I mean, just like society and just in general in any other industry, we should have been doing this a long time ago. And so I think we need to increase our efforts. And to your question about what we're doing right, I do think now there is a lot of attention that's been placed on it as an industry. And I think that DMOs in particular are really engaged in it. And I know that DI has been, and I know there are leaders within DI, Destinations International. Many of the heads of the DMOs in leadership have not only embraced it themselves, but have tried to bring others along. So I do think that we are getting it right because we're putting the right focus on it now, but we still have a long way to go.
So destination management organizations need to do so much more now than be marketing groups. And I think that really came into the spotlight with the Roe versus Wade decision. And I wanted just to get your opinion on how DMOs can help and your opinion on travel boycotts.
Well, do we have 5 hours to talk about this? Because that's a very complex subject. It's not new, first of all. This is not new. When I first got in the business 40 years ago, we were talking about the Equal Rights Amendment for women and states that had ratified that or states that had not ratified that. And there were boycotts back then. There were organizations, women's organizations primarily, but others that saw that saw women's issues as important to them, that made that statement back in those days. And then we saw what happened in Arizona with the Martin Luther King holiday. And I mean, this has been going on for a long time. I don't think they're particularly effective. Boycotts, I mean, I don't think they're particularly effective. I don't think they have the desired impact. And I go back all the way to the ERA, to the Equal Rights Amendment. It didn't change anything. As a country, we didn't pass the Equal Rights Amendment anyway. But it did a lot of harm to individual destinations that didn't really have a say in the policy of their states. With that said, I think we, as DMOs, we can make an impact. We can help carry that message. but we don't elect our state legislatures. Those of us individually within a destination. I'll take St. Louis as an example, as a part of Missouri. St. Louis is a very democratically based city, and the surrounding region is as well, until you get to a certain point geographically, and then it flips and it becomes very Republican, and almost all the rest of the state is very Republican until you get to the very far west side of the state where Kansas City is, and then Kansas City again is a bastion of Democrats. So if there are policies that are set by the state legislature, they're almost always going to be policies that follow the Republican platform. And if we have organizations that are holding meetings and events, business events, that from a national basis, that are more Democratic in their leanings than Republican in their leanings, then they could establish a boycott against the two major cities within the state. And those are the two major cities that probably agree with them on their issue.
I see.
But can't actually impact what the legislature is doing in the middle of the state, because the majority of the people who are elected to that legislature are from other parts of the state, not the parts that actually are empathizing. And when you do a boycott on an issue like that to a destination that's very, very meetings oriented, I'm just using our example, like in the case of St. Louis and Kansas City, is a big bread and butter for our industry. The people that actually get hurt when the industry gets hurt are the people that live and tend to vote for people who are actually empathizing with the organization's position. So I'm not sure if I'm saying it very well, except to say that I don't think they work. I haven't seen them actually, except for very, very rare situations, actually have any impact on the actual legislation, and they can be very harmful not to the people that they're trying to harm, but to the people actually that they would not want to harm if they thought through what's being done. And then I would say that the few times that I've seen the impact actually work, it's because of sports, not because of meetings and conferences. It's because the sports guys can talk sports to the legislators who don't value meetings and business events, but do really understand that the NCAA Final Four, they don't want that to boycott their state. So that goes to a whole other area of the importance of our industry and our ability or our inability to tell the same kind of story. But those are really the only times I can think of when a boycott has actually been successfully done. And it was because the sports people said they were going to boycott, not because the meetings and events people said they were going to boycott.
So do you feel the industry still has a ways to go in letting legislators realize the importance and the economic impact it represents?
Yeah. And and the challenge for us as DMOs is, my legislators in St. Louis, they get it. Mm-hmm. They totally get it. They're very supportive of our industry, and they know what it means for our community. They know what it means for the businesses in our community and the workers in our community. But the majority of our state legislators are people who are from areas that aren't really meetings and events driven, mm-hmm. and maybe not even tourism driven, maybe not even have any tourism to speak of. If they are very simply rural communities, their focus is on agriculture. Okay. Not on tourism. And so it will always be very challenging for us to deal with state legislatures unless we have a state whose entire economy and many destinations within it has really got a strong piece of their economy that comes from tourism. Without that, it's going to continually be a struggle.
So if there is a meeting group who is interested in bringing a piece of business to St. Louis, but doesn't really have the same politics as the state, but feels St. Louis has all the components in place that it needs to have a successful event, do you have any suggestions as to what planners can do? Like maybe, go visit with the legislator to explain the economic impact of that event and talk about issues? Is that something that you could help facilitate?
Yes. Although I would say that most organizations don't really want to have to mess with that. It's just easier for them to go to another state
so
and
then
find
you
a
lose that
destination
business
within that state. Yeah. I mean, what I would say is don't boycott a city like St. Louis or Kansas City because you don't agree with what Missouri as a state is doing. Come to us or Kansas City, or go to Chicago. Well, Chicago and Illinois are both Democratic, so that's not a good one. But when there's a conflict, because it can be the opposite. You could be a Republican leaning organization like the NRA or something like that, and you don't want to go to a state that has got anti-gun laws, right? So it can be one or the other. I'm not saying it's all, but in our case, don't penalize a democratically based city if you are a democratically based organization in your ideals. Work with us, come to us and say to us, will we get support from your mayor? Will we get support from your county executive? What can we do to make sure this is a positive thing for St. Louis? And then, maybe the folks in the rest of the state of Missouri will understand that the positive impact that has been made by having this. But by taking us out of the picture, you're never going to make your case anyway, and you're actually going to hurt the people in the hospitality industry who are very dependent on us being successful.
You touched upon women's rights. And the reality is you're one of the only women in the country you are the only woman in the country running operations for 3 entities. That's the Explore St. Louis. You're responsible for sales and marketing of the city in that role. And you're also run the Convention Center and the Dome at America's Center. I'm curious as to how you feel about the fact there's not many women heading DMOs like you are, and what it's like to run, 3 operations like you are in St.
Well, there are many more women running DMOs now than there used to be. So it's a progression. And there are many more women who are running large DMOs, which is a real testament to where we've come from. I remember in my early days in the industry, there were no women running large DMOs until Charlotte St. Martin was hired, and she came from the hotel world in a very high position, and until she came into the industry to head the DMO there in Dallas. That was groundbreaking for a large DMO to have a woman at their head. And I was always a woman, and I was always the head of the DMO, or in a lot of my jobs, not always, but it was small cities. It was, when I started in Carbondale, I was a 1-person shop. So it was a lot of small DMOs, 1, 2, 3 person organizations, but the big ones, the big cities, those decisions were being made by the boards of those DMOs, and the boards were all made up of basically male hoteliers. So they, they had their own network, and so women weren't able to break through. And so, we've seen that changing now. We've got a lot more women running these organizations, and I think that will continue because we've been able to get women up in the ranks. We also are getting women in at the board levels that make those decisions. We've got a long way to go still, but we've really come a long way. And I would say the same thing about convention centers. There were very few. I mean, Peggy Didakis ran the Baltimore Convention Center for 40 years, 30 years at least, maybe 40. She was one of the first women to do that. And that certainly has changed over time. But it is still a male dominated job. And it's harder for women because so many of those jobs come up from the operations side. Mm-hmm. And so if a woman doesn't start in on the operations side, if she doesn't start in, and being in housekeeping or in as an electrician or something where they kind of work their way up that way, it's kind of hard. Women tend to go more towards the event management side, and those top jobs tend to go more towards people who have the operations background and understand how HVAC systems work, et cetera. And so that still tends to be more male.
Can you offer advice to women who would like to break the glass ceiling in the industry?
Yeah, I think first of all, just put yourself out there and work hard and do a good job, but don't just assume that somebody's going to notice you. Just because you work hard and do a good job doesn't mean somebody's going to notice you. So put yourself out there and develop your networks, because I get calls all the time. And so I'm sure everybody else does, but I get calls all the time from people saying, we have an open job. Do you know of anybody? Can you refer anyone? And so if you haven't put yourself out there and I don't know you, even though you're working really hard and doing a great job in your convention center or your DMO, I don't know you to refer somebody to you. So that's what I'm saying. Put yourself out there, get yourself involved in the industry organizations so that people know who you are. In addition to working hard and doing a good job.
So it circles back to what we talked about at the beginning of our conversation, networking and being part of associations.
Yeah, it really does. And it's, if the pandemic taught us anything, it's that our networking and our face-to-face interactions cannot be replaced.
How is St. Louis doing post-pandemic? I read a study that you're still not back to where you were before the pandemic.
Yeah, we're not quite there. We use so many different metrics. Airline enplanements for our airport are strong. They're very strong. They're still not quite there. And I don't think the planes could be any more full on the weekends. It's business travel that is lagging. We're doing well in meetings and conventions. We're doing well in special events. We're doing really well in terms of leisure business overall. But, until the companies start putting people back out on the roads for just general business travel, and Tuesday and Wednesday become peak days for airline travel, and also as a result, peak days for hotel stays, we're not going to see a complete return. Now, when we look at some metrics, it actually looks like we have met or exceeded 2019. And an example of that is our hotel revenue. And the hotel revenue has actually exceeded where we were when the pandemic hit. But that's simply because the rates are all higher. not because the occupancy is higher. And so again, that really goes back to business travel. What used to be the peak nights being Tuesday, Wednesday, because of all the business travel that was the base, and then meetings and conferences were layered in on top of that. Now it's meetings and conferences pretty much only on Tuesday and Wednesday. And there's business travel that has returned, certainly, and continues to return, but it's not anywhere near where it was, at least in most destinations.
And how has your city been impacted by remote work?
Yeah, it's really just starting to have that impact. St. Louis was being touted as late as the start of this calendar year as being better off than most cities in the country in terms of that impact, and now suddenly that has turned, and we've had a number of companies just decide to relinquish their space, or a lot of their space, as their leases are coming up, and making the decision that they're not gonna be back at the same level they were pre-pandemic. And so as a city, how do you, we, as a destination marketing organization, we can't bring new businesses here. That's not our role. There are economic development agencies that are supposed to be doing that. And so we will let them try. But what our role then is to try to educate our local legislators on the importance of making sure that the visitor experience is a really good one, is a better one, and continues to be a better one, and develop that so that we can attract more people who are here for leisure purposes. And like my argument to our elected leaders here in St. Louis is, if you make the St. Louis experience great for attendees for meetings and conferences, and those that are coming here for leisure travel, to see the Arch, to go to a Cardinals baseball game, to whatever, if you make that experience really good for them here, it's also then the kind of experience that people will want to work in, and maybe will be effective in helping to stave off companies deciding to let people stay home, because maybe their people will actually want to be downtown in the hub of the activity where things are going on. So we'll see how that goes.
What is new in the city for groups?
We've actually had a lot of new venues just open this year, which is great. Many of them were started in development pre-pandemic and didn't take a hiatus. They continued to move forward in terms of the development through the pandemic. So that meant that in 2022, we actually started to see a lot of new openings. We've got a venue called City Foundry, another one called the Armory, both in the city, both big venues that are really great for groups to be able to do off-premise venues. And then other kind of existing attractions that were here that have developed new things for people to just do on their own. New experiences, new Ballpark Village is an example, which is an entertainment development that surrounds Busch Stadium, where the Cardinals play downtown. That has continued to add new elements. So we have new hotel there. There's a Live by Lowe's that's there. There are a ton of new restaurants there, things for people to do. And some of our existing visitor attractions have added more things, like City Museum, which is just like an adult playground downtown. It's not a museum at all. Has added new elements and things for people to do. So there's just a whole lot more activity for both groups as a group function for off-premise events, and also for attendees for meetings and conferences to do on their own in the city, in in the downtown area.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I'm getting back to you for a minute. You started as a retail store manager early in your career. I was curious in finding out how you found your way to the meetings industry.
Well, I was in I was in retail I started working retail when I was in high school, and I was planning on going to college. I was actually accepted by a couple of women's colleges, actually. And then I had a fight with my dad one day, and he said something like, "If you're going to live under my house, you're going to follow my rules." And I said, "See ya." And I went to the place that I was working, and I said, "No, I would like to work here full time." And they said, "Okay." And they made me an assistant store manager. And then pretty soon they gave me my own store. And pretty soon I had a couple of stores, and I was a regional. And so I was doing that all. I was like 20, 21, 22. I don't know what they were thinking. And then after about 5 or 6 years, one day I called my dad and I said, "You were right. I was wrong. Should have gone to college. I don't want to do this anymore." And he said, "Don't do anything rash." And I said, "I'm not, just let you know." Blowing off some steam. And a few weeks later, he called me and he said Carbondale was advertising for a director for their tourism bureau that they were starting. And I said, "What's a tourism bureau?" And there you have it. I got the job. Because he said to me, "Do you think anybody who knows anything about tourism is going to move to Carbondale to do it?" You are so right. Nobody. So I just went to the library and did all kinds of research on meetings, events, and leisure tourism. And then I went in and bluffed my way through an interview and got the job.
Wow, that's amazing. And it takes a big person to call and say, "You were right, I was wrong."
Yeah, he practically dropped the phone, because I don't think in my, at that point, 19 or 20 years or however old I was, I don't know, 20, 21. I don't think he'd probably ever heard me say I was wrong.
Oh my gosh. What is the one thing people would be surprised to learn about you?
Well, anybody who knows me, close to me, knows this, so they wouldn't be surprised at all. But I am a 40+ year vegetarian, which most people probably, when I became vegetarian in the early 80s, people thought I was really weird. It's weird. My brother used to say to me, like, "Krishna, Krishna, Hare Krishna," as if I was, some kind of person from an outer, planet, instead of the Irish Catholic, kid he knew. So, I've been not killing animals for 40 years. So
look at now, it's one of the biggest food trends, isn't it?
I know, but it was hard back then. In those days, their restaurants had no vegetarian options.
But
None.
They would give you iceberg lettuce, right?
Oh yeah, it was awful stuff. And which iceberg lettuce has no nutritional value, so nobody should ever eat it. You should always eat spinach or something that actually has good nutritional value. But anyway,
if you're from the Iceberg Lettuce Foundation, please.
Yeah, sorry about that, Iceberg Lettuce Foundation, but it's a nice ad, but it doesn't have any nutritional value other than the fact that it's got a lot of water in it. Yeah, I used to call, when I got in the business, and being in the business, every single banquet that I went to, I would call the hotel in advance and ask for the banquets department and tell them that I was going to be attending the, Rotary Club lunch or whatever it was, and that I needed a vegetarian meal. That's what you had to do in those days. Meeting professionals did not order vegetarian meals. They didn't order vegetarian alternatives for somebody who said they wanted one. So if you went to a banquet, the first time anybody heard that you wanted a vegetarian meal was when you said it to your server. So they weren't prepared. So I always called them in advance and ordered it. And so one day I didn't have to do that anymore because everybody got with the program. It was so great. And I didn't have to eat just cheese.
What made you become vegetarian back then?
I read,
Health or
no, it was animal related. I read an article about how calves were treated to make milk-fed veal, and went off veal, and then it was just one thing after another.
Well, I'm a vegetarian as well, so
I
get it.
Very good. Very good for you. Saved some animals in your lifetime.
What attributes or qualities have you developed that have led to your success?
Well, I don't know if I've developed them,
Besides
but
being a vegetarian.
yeah, well, that has not led to my success. In fact, that's probably held me back a few times because some people just thought I was weird. Men, basically. Sorry, I know there may be a man or two listening to the podcast, but I grew up in a household where you were expected to work and you worked hard, and my dad came from nothing, really nothing. I mean, his dad died when he was 3 years old, and he slept on a cot in a one-bedroom kitchen, he slept on a cot in the kitchen in a one-bedroom apartment, and his mother and sister slept in the one bed in the one bedroom.
And where was that?
In Chicago.
Wow.
And so he came from nothing, and he wanted good things for us, and he always provided good things for us, but we never had a lot of money. And so we were always expected to work. And I think I've always had a good work ethic. And I expect that from others too. So I expect to see that. And I have great respect for people in my organization and others that I work with that I see have a good work ethic. And I don't necessarily have respect for people who I think are coasting half the time. Because it's hard. Life is hard. Life is hard, and our industry is hard. And while it's oftentimes we say we have fun jobs because we get to do fun things, and we really do get to do fun things, we also have a great responsibility to our communities. The people that hire us to do good work. And that means we are beholden to the ideals of the community, to the economy of the community. And in particular, for me, the importance is to the people who work in the industry. And it's our responsibility to do the very best job that we can to ensure that people have jobs and have good jobs and have things they can count on, which was why the pandemic was so very devastating for us, because we were in so many ways so powerless, because governments were making decisions. And I mean, I was fighting those governments here every day about restrictions on us. And I am a strong believer in being vaccinated. And I volunteered to give the convention center free for vaccinations so that our own team could get vaccinated. I mean, I'm very, very strong on that personally. But I also felt that the restrictions that were being imposed on us were arbitrary, and that people were making decisions about sizes of gatherings and sizes of venues when they had no knowledge of what the ability of those venues were to create a safe environment. And so, that time was so challenging because we knew we had so many people dependent on us and looking to us to help them. And it was hard to help them. So.
And it goes back to what we talked about earlier, like a lack of understanding.
Right. So it's as a DMO, it's a constant education for us. For me personally, my whole career has been based on this. And, I know that when we can reward people for doing a good job, recognize them for doing a good job, in our industry, that means the world, because quite often those folks are kind of behind the scenes and no one ever thanks them, But if no one ever thanks them, why would they want to stay in this industry?
How many are on your team?
we're still not quite back to pre-pandemic levels, but we have right now about 115 full-time.
Okay.
And then hundreds and hundreds of part-times, and then also contract workers on the convention center and the stadium side. We've got vendors that provide, other jobs, but those aren't on our team directly.
Well, that is a large team that you're leading. How do you make sure you're an effective leader? Do you have any tips you can share?
It's hard to know whether you're being effective or not, isn't it? It is hard as a leader because I think you have to have some ability to read people yourself, because you can't just rely on what you're being told. You have to have confidence in the direct reports. You have to hire people, good people that you trust, who report to you directly. But you also can't rely just on what you're being told, because there is an untold story everywhere. And the untold story might not be positive. The untold story might be very positive, but no one thinks to share it. So I do think as a leader, you have to walk around a little bit. I try to do that in the convention center because I tend to spend more of my time in my office than an effective leader should. So I try to get down and walk around the convention center and say hello to people and just ask them how they're doing, and stop and talk to, George, the part-time worker who, has to have call a ride because he's disabled, but he's still here, and I want to know how he's doing. And if I talk to him, I might hear some things from him that I wouldn't hear from any of my direct reports, because he sees things differently, and he sees things that others maybe don't see at all. So I think an effective leader has to be able to do that.
Uncover the untold story.
Yeah, positive or negative.
Okay. What does the future hold for the industry?
I think it's very bright. I said it just a minute ago in a kind of a different context, but about the pandemic. There were all kinds of people who are not in our industry who gave a prognosis for our industry that was very negative. And we heard it nationally and internationally and locally. People who said, well, there won't be convention. There's no need for convention centers in the future. Well, the meetings industry has changed forever and everything is going to be done online. And you couldn't argue with those people. I mean, I argued with those people when I had the opportunity. I'm good at that. But I will take them on and tell them they're wrong, but you couldn't really argue with them because everything was an unknown at that point, right? What they saw was everything was shut down. And until things were able to restart and you could see and you could demonstrate to them that they had been wrong, you couldn't convince them at the time that they were wrong. And so I think what has happened is that we know that they were wrong, and they know that they were wrong. And that while some things have changed, and that's a constant, things always change, our industry has been shown to be critically important, because that face-to-face interaction is not something that can be replaced online. It simply isn't. There are lots of other tools that can help facilitate dialogue, can help facilitate education, but there is nothing like the face-to-face that goes on. We have a convention going on right here, right in-house right now. It started yesterday. It's a union convention, national convention. They're doing their voting for their officers. They could do their voting online. But what's happening here is that they're electioneering, right? They're standing in the lobbies of the convention center downstairs right below me. and they're wearing the shirts for their candidates, and they're passing out buttons, and they are influencing votes because they can do that face to face in a way they could never do it online. And there are just some things that we've been proven out as an industry. If anybody thought our industry was dying, they found out they were wrong. And I think it's just very bright going forward.
Our last question is always, who should we have on the next podcast? Who would you recommend we reach out to?
I don't know if you've done this with him. I didn't see it on your list, but I would recommend that you talk to Mike Gamble with Searchwide, because he's really doing a lot of work on recruitment in the industry. You asked me one question earlier about diversity. That's something that he's taken on in terms of a focus, and just the future of workforce and changes in the workforce. I think he'd be a really good one. And I don't know if you've spoken with Sheriff Karamat at PCMA or Michelle Mason at ASAE, but Michelle's been doing really great work, I think, at ASAE, and it's been I think it's been hard. I would guess it's been hard. John Graham did just such a phenomenal job with ASAE for so long, and then with his illness and then the pandemic, I think they were in a bit of hurt, and I think she's doing a really great job. And Sheriff is doing amazing work now with artificial intelligence and all kinds of other tools at PCMA.
Right. So. Well, this has been great.
No,
so yeah, fascinating. Kitty, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to do this. How long have you been with Skift? Because you were not.
I've been with them for a year and a half.
A year and a half. Okay. That's what. Because I saw your name come up with Skift, and I thought, wait a minute, I thought she was with someone else.
But no, happy to be with Skift, and so happy to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun for me too. Thank you very much.
Will you be at DI next week?
Just for the very first day. I have to leave Wednesday morning. So
maybe we can meet. I'll be there.
Oh, okay. I get in Monday night and leave Wednesday morning.
Okay, I'll reach out via email.
Terrific.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Bye.